Now, this will be brief. I'm not going to do a serious deep dive, or maybe, I don't know, it may be a partial one. But anyway, watched this the other night. Hadn't seen it in years. This is Love and Basketball, right? With Sanaa Lathan, Omar Epps. And I remember when this came out, I was actually a fan. You know, I was really, I enjoyed it. You know, I always like seeing beautiful black folk on screen. That's one of those things my generation is a little susceptible to. And thank you, Malika. Yeah, Harry Lennox was Dresser in 5 Heartbeats. Yeah, absolutely. Shannon says her father has prostate cancer. The prognosis is good if caught early. Thank you, Shannon, and shout out to your father. And those of us out there, if you haven't gotten checked, please do so. Because if you have to have it, if it's checked early, all the better. All right. Anyway, so I was watching Love and Basketball, and for those who aren't familiar, and if you're, you know, I don't know how you wouldn't be, but anyway, this was a film came out some years ago. Let's see, 1990s, and love story about a young couple that actually starts in childhood. Right. This came out in actually 2000. Okay, so 2000. Anyway. So these two young lovers are basketball lovers, right? And they end up living next door to each other right around age 10 or 11, somewhere in there is where the story starts. And from there, the whole film is about them becoming adults and going into their, their kind of relationship with one another and all the twists and turns it goes through as they go through life. Anyway, I saw it again the other night for the first time in quite a while. And it was just some observations that I thought were interesting. And I focus obviously on 3 main men in the film that were all presented as a problem on one level or another. Right. First one you have is yet again, Harry Lennox. What's up, officer? Good to see you in here. Harry Lennox plays Sanaa Lathan's father, right, in this particular piece. Like I said, it was going to be a 2-part Harry Lennox film tonight. Don't know why, it just happened that way. But anyway, trying to bring this up. Usually I have it up on screen, but I mean, at least some of the information I like to use. I don't always remember the characters' names, which might be useful in a situation like this. Anyway, here we go. All right. Now we're back in there. Right. So Sanaa plays Monica Wright. Omar plays Quincy McCall. Right. And so anyway, the father here plays Monica's, or Harry Lennox plays the father. And the dynamic that's kind of struck here is that he is married to Alfre Woodard's character, who you can see right there. There's a number of films that she's done that I've enjoyed. So it was interesting to see her in here. Wow, they don't even, okay, there she is. She's Camille Wright. She plays his wife. And the tension between the daughter, played by Sanaa Lathan, and her mother is that Sanaa is kind of the young basketball athlete, and they don't use the term feminist, but there are clearly feminist impulses in this. There's a tension between the two, right? So they didn't quite draw it down the line where the women were all kind of perfect and the men were all problems. You know, there's some tensions between mother and daughter about what womanhood is, what acceptable womanhood is, and femininity. The father in this one, however, is the part I'm going to focus on. Now, he's actually considered, or he's presented to be a fairly good father. He doesn't have an affair that we know of. He doesn't beat his wife or the children that we know of. You don't get that impression at all. He's a pretty stand-up dude from the way they present him. And he works at a bank, right? And they live in this nice suburb right next to a black family where the father is an NBA player and the wife is pretty much a dime piece that marries him. So anyway, Harry Lennox, in this particular image, plays the father, a successful banker. And at the beginning of the film, they're just moving into this suburb. So he's doing well. The mother talks about this later in the film, how she gave up her desire to start her own catering business in order to raise a family, right? Something you don't really see talked about in contemporary media, right? But the tensions between her and her daughter, played by Sanaa, are pretty extreme, and they go into adulthood where Monica is upset that her mother didn't stand up for herself, didn't make her presence more well known. And the example she chooses to use is when her father comes home with a couple of pizzas, despite that she's been cooking all day, and the mother just, kind of backs off. Everybody has pizza for dinner. This was her example, alongside the fact that the mother is not really into basketball and doesn't understand her daughter's obsession with it. But the point being, she's upset that her mother didn't make her presence more felt and felt like she catered to her man too much. Now, this is the brother who, what looks to be in the mid to late 1980s, moves his family into a suburb as a black banker and is highly participatory in the family, as a matter of fact. They even show him, showing up to games. They show him talking to his daughter about basketball. They're trying to get her recruited into college. And so they're having in-depth conversations. You can see him in this image there with a video camera in hand, very active participant father, at least in terms of the few short scenes we had a chance to watch. And I found it interesting how they kind of subtly presented him to be this patriarchal, domineering figure, right? Successful banker, raising a family in the suburbs, housewife who sacrifices, as they put it, her life to raise a family. And they did present it as a choice that she made that she was unapologetic about, but her daughter resents her for not being more outspoken. Now, I'm not really going to delve into the mother-daughter dynamic, right? But I am interested in the subtle way that even though you don't see any scenes of him being a problem, he's dismissed in a very particular kind of way, with this kind of subtle undertone of being this kind of oppressive or oblivious and problematic patriarch, even though every indication we've actually seen of him, and you only see him for a couple of scenes throughout the entire movie, have actually been positive and participatory. The one scene where they try to give you the impression that he's a problem is the day before it seems like he's about to start his new job at the bank, right? He comes in and he has two shirts and he's asking his wife to iron one, and he can't pick which one to wear. So he asks her to iron both. He gives her a kiss, says thank you, walks out the room. And this is supposed to be a subtle nod that he's a problem. It's pretty safe to say that if you were a banker, hell, if you're a banker now, let alone in the early 80s or mid 80s, that you were doing pretty well. Six-figure range, of course. They're living at least in a 2-story suburban house, and his wife is a housewife. And it is a crime for him to ask her to iron 2 shirts, even though he's actually put the family in this kind of dynamic. So I found that interesting. That was the first part. So again, we're looking at 3 males in the film. This is the first one. So the first one is a problem because he wanted his wife to iron the 2 shirts. And then she even, the Monica, or the daughter, even describes her mother as, sacrificing her career interests just so her man can feel strong. Her man can feel good at night about being a man. A very dismissive, kind of misandrist way of looking at her mother as a step stool that her father rubs his dirty boots on or something of that nature, even though she's being raised in a suburb and taken care of, all her needs met, safe, the whole kind of deal. The dismissal of black men, even in films that we consider classics that we enjoyed coming up, or at least I did, the subtle ones at that are harder to catch sometimes. But when you sit back and watch it again from a masculinist vantage point, you're like, wow, this is a problem, even though we didn't know it was. So here's the next one. So there's the scene where she comes back as an older adult. All she knows how to do is play basketball. He gets his daughter a job at his bank. And you can even see his picture on the wall, right behind where he's sitting and helping his daughter get her first job. And this is the problematic patriarch, right? She turned down any jobs because of the abusive nature the father had? No. She turned down any of the advantages that he provided for her to be where she is? No. Yet and still, he's a problem. But again, except for him asking for 2 shirts to be ironed, every scene you see him in, he's supportive as hell. He's sitting at basketball games with recording her on camera. He's having a conversation with her about having not been recruited yet. And maybe they need to have different collegiate strategies in terms of that. And then, of course, this is, I think, this might be the next time you see him after that, where he's welcoming his daughter into the new job at a bank. Now, she has no qualification for this, so it's safe to assume he got her the job. Was there any respect extended to the father, even verbally? No. He's just a problem, right? Next up would be, right? Now, this is Monica's movie, right, for the most part, but this is where we have Omar Epps' character, Quincy. This is the lifelong love interest, right? They meet as children. He pushes her on the basketball court when he can find out she plays a little better than he does, to where it cuts her face. Again, we can't handle women that are good at things. So we got to beat them up. We got to make them draw blood because we're just men, and, boys, male, we're male. So even as a young boy, he hurts her or whatever. Later, as they come into their teen years, Quincy comes into his own. And again, his father is an NBA player. So he's being groomed, much like Kobe, right? He's being groomed to go into the NBA, except that his father wants him to get an education. We'll get to that in a moment. So Quincy is a problem because they end up going to USC together, and they're both playing on, the male and female teams, of course. Quincy starts out doing really well. She has to struggle her way up because she was a last-minute recruit. And then, Quincy begins to go through his own issues. And one of the major issues he goes through is he finds out that his NBA playing father has had an affair and lied about it. And it shattered his world that the man that he's looked up to and put on a pedestal lied to him and was fallible. So from that point in college, all the way to the end of the movie, he completely cuts off his father, right? He bonds with his mother. And of course, there's a period in college where he and Monica fall apart. And he's very mean to her. And what happens, it's the night he's discovered his father's lied. He's having a conversation with his girlfriend, Monica, about it. And she opts to leave the conversation because she has curfew and she won't start on the team if she misses curfew, right? And he just kind of says, okay. And from there, you can see there's an emotional wall that comes up that he explains later in the film as he gets a little older, that basically he didn't know who to trust after his father did what he did. His whole world was shattered. He didn't know who to trust. And when she wasn't there for him that particular night, he kind of cut her off. And eventually, which was a short period of time later, he decides to drop out of school and go into the draft and go into the NBA and play pro. And they don't see each other for some years after that. I don't really think they said how many, but not until later. As a matter of fact, the picture on the right is a young, Quincy in school with her. The picture on the left is after they reunite years later. So the image we get of Quincy is that he's almost a kind of villain. And the reason he's kind of a villain is because he disregards her, not only her feelings, but her desire to achieve. Now, what do I mean? He's considered a monster because he expected her to sacrifice starting on the team by violating curfew and being there for him as he's talking about what this means. Because mind you, his basketball career starts to suffer as well. His mind is shattered around what his father did. And she says at one point to him, I would never ask you to choose between basketball and me. And what I did say, what I will give this film, there were certain scenes where the men explained themselves a little better than I expected. And there's a point where she says that to Quincy and he looks her dead in the eye and said, you never have to. Meaning, I would have been there for you, regardless of what the impact would have been for me, because I love you that much. And she admits later in the film that she couldn't quite separate her goals and being in a relationship. So even though she's angry at him, even though he's portrayed as a problem, she does admit later on that she understands that she really didn't know how to balance these things as a young woman. But Quincy is kind of positioned nonetheless as kind of this unfeeling villain because he doesn't prioritize her career interests in a moment of need. And he starts hanging out with another girl or whatever and breaks up with her as he goes pro. When they reconnect later, he's engaged, right? He's engaged and she basically wants to take him from the woman he's engaged to, which is a whole nother part of the story. But he's again presented as a villain at that point, so to speak, because she decides that she wants to play basketball against him for his heart, as it were, meaning whoever wins. If she wins, he dumps his fiance and gets with her. If he wins, she stops pushing all together and lets him get married, right? And in this basketball, the game they have, this one-on-one, which is the opposite in many respects of the game they play as children, where Quincy is really, he's had a knee injury, but aside from that, he's he plays far better than she does. He beats her and relinquishes the game so that she could win. Yeah, Winston, I don't know. Gigi's doing his thing. He knows what time I go. He's doing his thing. I can't call it. I love the brother, but it is what it is. Anyway, so what I'm saying to you is, in this instance, you have two moments where Quincy is presented as a kind of a villain for not prioritizing her feelings, right? Even though his own motivations are made irrelevant, right? The fact that he's getting engaged, irrelevant. She wants what she wants. Prior to that, the fact that his world is shattered behind his relationship with his father, but it's about her career. So you have these kind of subtle moments. And the last and most obvious male villain in the film is Quincy's father. Now, this is probably the most traditional bad black man, figure. And he's played by Dennis Haysbert, Everybody knows who Dennis is. We've seen him in commercials. We've seen him in other films. I like the brother as an actor. He plays Zeke McCall, NBA player who is transitioning the end of his career and trying to find some other place to work in the NBA. Right? He doesn't go into detail, but basically he doesn't have a quality education and he wants his son to have that. Now, the way they show him, he's a very hands-on father, right? Hands-on, supportive father. And Quincy, as you can even see in this image here, looks up to him. The look on Quincy's face here is reflective of how the character feels about his father for the first third of the film. Nothing but respect, because the man has prioritized his son. As a matter of fact, this scene that you're looking at, he's talking to a reporter right after his son has finished playing a high school game and is prepping for a reporter to make sure the reporter is there when his son announces what college he's going to. Very hands-on father who loves his son. Now, he and his wife, played by Debbie Morgan, aren't getting along well, right? Because he's having affairs on the side. He's, trying to, parlay his NBA career into something else because he really doesn't have anything after basketball. He's not prepared for anything else. And he doesn't want to go back to school at his age, which is something his wife wants to do, right? So his wife has him followed. Turns out there's a paternity issue from one of the affairs he's having. Of course, the wife is angry and she divorces him. It is what it is. I don't have no problem with that. Quincy, of course, takes his mother's side of the thing. But the part that I was bothered by is for the rest of the film, even as an adult with a child of his own, Quincy completely cuts his father out of his life. This was reminiscent of when I covered the film Fences, where Denzel plays the main character Troy in Fences, right? His mistakes also lead to being completely cut out of the family. And so you kind of have this trope in some black films, particularly if they're dealing with black families, where fathers are always meeting some kind of tragic end, emotionally so, or in terms of their very existence, right? Not always, but in many situations, right? Because then you have the whole other alternative narrative. If you look at something like James in Good Times, where the character just dies off screen, right? But there's always a problem with black fathers. And I think one of the problems we have is we have a difficult time imagining black fathers in a positive light or in a constructive light, even if being constructive is not necessarily positive. Now, obviously, you have the Bill Cosby and the Cosby Show dynamic, right? And as soon as Bill himself, not Heathcliff Huxtable, but as soon as Bill became a problem, everybody wanted to eliminate Heathcliff, which I found interesting. Cliff was, the Cosby Show was supposed to be eliminated, even though the character himself. So we have a problem with black fatherhood, right? And some of the imagery that comes with that. And it actually might even tie into our subject later on tonight, when we're starting to talk a little bit about black men during slavery. There's a problem of imagery. There's a problem of narrative, and we do not know how to do black men well. They are constantly making these dire mistakes that hurt everybody around them. But my problem is not the mistakes they make. My problem is twofold. On one level, no other characters make significant life errors the way Black male characters do, when we all make them, right? So you see fathers cheating on their wives. Do we see films too many? How many films do we see where the mothers are cheating on their husbands? Right? We don't see that. Especially if it's just, if the father's already done it, we pretty much can presume that all the other characters, especially the women, are pristine and perfect. And that is the case in Love and Basketball, right? The mother really doesn't do anything wrong, right? There's no problems anywhere else. The problem is strictly him. The other part that I have a problem with is not only that the other characters tend to be perfect and the males make these dire mistakes, but that they're completely and permanently excised from family and there's no forgiveness. Part of the reason that we're pushed to forgive in real life, if we have any degree of spiritual maturity, is that we all make mistakes. Right? But when it comes to Black fathers, particularly in film, there's no forgiveness. But in this instance, there wasn't even any forgiveness from his son. Now, one of the things that Zeke tells his son is, look, when he's having a conversation with his son, and he says, look, you know what? I lied. I apologize. I only lied to you because I didn't want to see the look on your face you have right now. He said, but what I want you to understand, because it was pretty inevitable that his son was going to go to the NBA, right? He said, I want you to understand, when you're playing pro ball, there's 100 women at each game. And long story short, he says the boldest one will be in your room at a certain point. And he says, after a while, it just becomes part of the game. He said, your mother, he implies that his mother, his wife, I should say, or Quincy's mother, she was one of those pretty girls that got pregnant. And Quincy was like, are you trying to say that mom trapped you? Which really, that's what he was saying. His mother trapped him. But Zeke doesn't go down that line. What he says is, I'm trying to tell you I took care of my responsibilities as a man. Right? So that said, I'm not saying the man is perfect. I'm not saying he didn't do things that were upsetting. What I'm saying is, his lesson to his son was that I made a mistake, but I've taken care of you and my wife well in all of this time. From there, Quincy, decides to basically slap his father in the face. Not physically. He does so by saying that he's going to drop out of school and go into the draft and go pro against his father's wishes. Much of it really to piss his father off. Quincy's career in the NBA is lackluster. He eventually hurts himself. And he really doesn't have anything but basketball, just like his father. And on the night his father comes to his hospital room to talk to him after he damages his ACL, he rejects his father again. And at the end of that conversation, he says to him in tears, why couldn't you be the man you kept trying to make me into? And his father said, I'm sorry, son, I couldn't. But that is the burden of fathers. That's the burden of fathers. We try to provide our kids, but especially, and when I say especially, I don't mean more so than daughters, but I am saying in a particular way, it's easier to see our sons as an extension of who we are. And we're trying to give him what we didn't have in hopes that he will go further than what we have. See, the goal of the father is to make sure that your son supersedes you in every way, at least those ways that are constructive to him. Now, I would say for all his faults, Zeke was an excellent father that at the very least deserved to continue to have a relationship. Now, there's a difference between the relationship a boy has with his father and a grown man has with his father. And I think that this film could have showcased that. A fallible father, a son who understands his father's foibles and yet accepts him as a man because he understands how easy it is to fall into those same foibles, especially as a young NBA player himself. Now, he may have become the kind of person that would never do to his wife and his family what his father did because of what happened. Either way, lesson learned from his father. But his father was to him for most of his life something very special. And the film did not take an opportunity to revisit how a son and a father can reconnect. Now, I'm saying something here because this, I've gone through something similar. It took years for even myself and my father to reconnect. And we did. We did. Took a long time. My parents divorced when I was 5. I had all kinds of anger issues at a young age because of that. And a lot of it was misdirected at my father because I was only given bits and pieces of information about what was going on. It took years to reconcile what wasn't told. So that said, the notion of father-son forgiveness is present in Black families, but not necessarily in Black film. And up until the first third of the film, this is probably one of the best father-son films I've seen. It's not really a father-son film. You only get glimpses, but the chemistry between them as such is powerful. If this was a series and it was a little bit longer, it might even be akin to Deep Space Nine, right? Benjamin Sisko and his son Jake. But it is that positive early on. And there's just, look, at the end of the day, all I'm trying to tell you is there's no redemption for Black men in narrative, in media. Very few times do you see it. It's a fairly rare thing. What's good, Gigi? See you in here. There's no redemption for Black men. And that's the problem. Black men are the only ones making significant mistakes that hurt everybody in the family, and they're not redeemed. Go watch this film. You'll enjoy elements of it. And if you're around my age, there's some nostalgic moments that'll touch you, from the music to the dances to young love to being in college, all of that. Thank you, Extended Clips. Appreciate the support. But at the end of the day, pay subtle attention to the treatment of the men, both fathers as well as Quincy himself. And look at how this particular film, positioned from a Black woman's vantage point, treats Black men. Interesting. So nonetheless, thank you for bearing with me, but I just had to get that out after watching it. So that was Love and Basketball.